Hello everybody, welcome back to Dominions 5. This is the start of a new series, a new Let's Play. This game is beginning in December 2019, and it is the tournament, the round one of the tournament that is hosted by Lucid. And so I'm sure you've all seen already the announcement. By the time this goes up, I'm sure the announcement has gone up many months ago. And so there are two different brackets to the tournament. There's 4 games for players who are a bit more advanced, as defined by somebody who's at least won one game. And then there are 2 larger games for the dreamers, those who have not won any games. So I am in game 1 of the 4 main bracket games. And we're playing with a bunch of other players, including General Confusion, who's another YouTuber, as I'm sure you all know. So and I'm sure he'll be recording a Let's Play of this series, so I'll definitely include a link to his series once that is up. And so it should be interesting to have, at least for you guys, to see at least 2 perspectives on this game. And then we'll see if we do well enough. If we either win this game or come in second, then we'll be able to go on to the final match with the winners of the other games. If we don't, then maybe I'll ask Lucid to do to be one of the observer for that game, so I can sort of cast everything that's going on. That'd be really interesting to do. But anyways, first things first, we're playing this game. The age of the game was picked at random, and we got the late age, and I'm pretty excited about that because it's been a while since I've played in the late age. We have a map that has been pre-generated. So why don't I show you quickly this map was generated using a map nuke, which does a pretty good job of making a fairly balanced map with the thrones very equally spaced and the starting provinces equally spaced. And importantly, everybody has 5 provinces surrounding their cap circle. So it's a pretty balanced map. So we'll load this up in just a moment. There was a draft for the nations, and I was pretty much in the middle, but I got what I wanted. We are going to play as Late Age Man. Now, some of you I believe the first Dominions Let's Play I did on this channel was with Late Age Man, and I haven't dared to go back and look at it because it's got to be so bad. I'm sure, not only in terms of the YouTuber-ness of it, I'm sure was pretty bad, but also just my Dominions play must have been awful. I've learned a lot since then. I'm still not a perfect player by any means, but hopefully we'll do better. Then again, we're going to be playing against some very high-quality opponents here. So why don't we... well, let me tell you who we're playing against. In this game, there are 8 players. Cataclysm is set to turn 75, so this is not going to be a super epic game, but it's quite possible it goes into the late game, quite solidly in the late game, but I don't expect this to go to like turn 100. So the 8 nations, we have Man, that is us. There's also Ulm, Tinchy, but this is what General Confusion is playing Tinchy, by the way. Agartha, Sitis, Midgard, Potala, and Atlantis. So those are the 8 nations we are playing against. So I'm going to do a nation overview, but inspired by what I've done for some of my recent overviews, I want to kind of set the scene first, and let's look at who we're playing against briefly. So, there were some bans, by the way. There was a voting system to ban a few nations. So among other nations, we banned Raga, which is pretty common in late age because they have pretty awful meme bless sacreds. We banned Lemuria. I think we also banned Archocephaly or Kalem. I think we banned Kalem and Relay. Yeah, so banning Relay is pretty common. Relay is pretty cancer in the late age. Anyways, let's go through some of these other nations we'll be playing against. So there's no underwater nations, but Atlantis is a sort of coastal nation, and they have pretty good access to underwater. Late age Agartha is considered. Late age Atlantis is considered a fairly good nation. Has a good chance of winning. They have their troops are very expensive in terms of resources, right? We're talking like 40 resources for a lot of these. Well, I'm looking at the sacreds here, so bad example. 30 to 40 resources, but they have really high protection and they have ice protection too. So in cold scales, which of course they'll get, these guys are just going to have really, really, really high protection. And because they're amphibious, they have really good access to underwater. And you see a lot of these guys just have magic weapons. That's both good and bad. It means, first of all, you don't have to take on your bless, and it completely negates things like fog warriors. But it also means that having high magic resistance on your troops is going to really reduce incoming damage effectively. So that's a double-edged sword. Now they don't have like ranged weapons like crossbows, but they do have harpoons, which does a web. So that's really nice. That's a great way to pin down some tough melee troops that are incoming. You've got a sacred here, which has a bone glaive. This just does additional weakness, so it reduces the strength. And and they've got some underwater troops as well. And in terms of their mages, it's water and death mainly. Okay, let's take a look here. We got water, death 1, and then we got these guys who are water 3, death 2, with a bit of randoms here. They have some underwater troops. I'm not focusing on these because there isn't going to be a lot of underwater stuff. They've got a national spell, which is a remote assassination that uses water death, which is also really nice. Serious contenders. Let's keep going through some of our other opponents. Okay, we're playing against Potala. Potala is the Bandar Log evolution into late age, so you have all the usual monkey stuff. This time their sacreds are these Naga, which are okay. They've got some interesting things. They've also got some weaknesses. So what's nice is they are amphibian, so you could contest underwater with your sacreds. They've got all these attacks. So they've got poison spit, and venom fangs. So if you don't have any kind of poison resist, this is a nice addition. The weapon itself is pretty ordinary, but you also have this stun hypnotize attack. They have, unfortunately, well, these are the Naga actually. The Naga warriors, the one you recruit in the capital. Sorry. So these ones have a falchion, which is actually a much better weapon. And the problem is they have okay protection. They don't have a hat, which is a problem for dealing with arrows. And there's a lot of crossbows in late age, so this is a big liability here. And in terms of mages, they have, obviously they're an astral power with the yogi, the very cheap sacred astral mages. We still have the gurus, the S2 nature ones. And then we have these nagas. We have the Nagaraja, which is water 2 earth nature. And it has it's a sacred troop, and it's very similar to the recruitable sacred. We have the Nagini, which is has no gear on it, so it's a little less thuggy, but it has a bit more magic paths. And we have the Nagarishi, which is an epic mage. Like in late age, even in early age, you don't have mages that have 8 paths on them. This is a pretty epic mage here. So that's Potala. You can do kind of some mimi things with the sacreds, but in general, it's considered a little weaker, just because a lot of these archers don't really do much in late age when nations have a lot of protection. So we'll have to see what this player has planned. Okay, Midgard. Trying to do elves in the late age. So this is the human elf nation. So we do have elves, but actually none of these troops are glamour. This is now age of men, right? So we don't have any glamour except on the Vans, which are the good old cavalry sacreds. This unit is honestly very similar to what it was in the previous ages. So it still only has 13 protection. It's just a stealthy glamour medium cavalry, right, with high defense. However, they also have the skin shifters as usual. These they have regen and a great sword. Not a lot of hit points though, and not a lot of protection. And we have the Ein here, which is actually a fantastic unit. So this unit is a dual wielder with a broadsword and an axe. It starts with 16 protection and has Berserker 5. So that protection is going to go up. This damage is going to go up. These are really nasty guys to go up against. And their magic paths are, they've got these Astral 2s, which are pretty sweet. You've got air access and some minor blood access here. Oh, and we've got, you know, these guys that can kind of thug with air and blood. So your typical sort of Vanheim types of magic spells. We've got Satis. Late Age Satis, so you still have sort of no archers, but these, for example, the Falchineers, which are these dual-wielding troops, and these poison guys. And again, we have this kind of recruit, this Cap Sacred, which is sort of like a heavy infantry, a lizard heavy infantry, which is okay. It's got high protection. In the earlier ages, Satis is the natural protection of 5 on all of their troops is actually a nice bonus because it just means you have much higher protection than other things. In the late age, you know, these Falchineers with 15 protection, 5 of which is natural, is actually just kind of average. And so, yeah. However, this is a reanimating nation, so kind of in the style of Scaleria, although not to the same extent. They can summon these undead priests, which can reanimate hordes and hordes of undead. And so we've got, and we still have the recruitable Holy Threes, but they also have summonable Holy Threes, and we've got some fire and death mages mostly. So that does Skelespam, or you can do Banefire, which is a nice fire death crosspath evocation spell. We've got the Stormancers, which are now fire and death. They used to be fire and sort of nature water, a bit of maybe astral and earth in here. And of course we have the Empoisoners, which are these death nature assassins, which is a fantastic kind of assassin. But these are cap only, so if you're recruiting those, well, actually, it's not like the Stormancers are recruited anywhere, so you don't need to recruit these in the cap. So this is going to be hordes of undead with some death and fire support. Next, we have Agartha. Late Age Agartha is basically a human nation. Previously Agartha tended to have those large size 4 giants and sacreds. Now it's basically a human nation. Very high protection troops in general. So, for example, we have this Sapper, which specializes in siege, but let's see. The Sacred here is the Blind Fighter, very high protection, heavy infantry. I don't know if you saw 37 resources, very expensive. Even the, light infantry, right, 15 protection. So, fairly high protection troops, heavy infantry again. You've got this weird Cave Knight. This is one of those cavalry that when they die, the mount keeps fighting. But it's very expensive and I think pretty average overall. Notice most of all these units have dark vision. The idea is they live in caves and they're not very good at seeing outdoors. Now they also have this special, these crossbows, the Agarthan crossbowmen with the Agarthan steel crossbow, which is a crossbow. So crossbows are nice in the late age. These are great units, I would say, and you have 3 varieties. So you have the cheaper one, which you can just mass with very little protection. If you wanted, and then you have average and high protection. The big weakness that these crossbows have is they have terrible precision because they live in caves, so they can't see shit. So precision of 8 is pretty bad, and you don't have native air access to do wind guide. So yeah, this is a bit more of a spray and pray kind of archery technique. If we look at the magic paths, we have earth and death mostly. We've got these guys which can do pretty decent skill spam if you wanted a wall of chaff in front of your crossbowmen. And they also provide resource bonuses, which is important because your troops cost a ton of resources. And then we've got a bit of elemental access here, so you can definitely find a way to do with a few lucky paths here, you can definitely do flaming arrows to boost your crossbows even more. So this is mostly earth and death paths. Fun nation. Incidentally, in one of the other games, in Lucid's own game, I believe he is playing as late age Agartha. And I don't think this is going to be a spoiler. I'm pretty sure he will release his videos ahead of mine. Okay, let's keep going. We are also playing against Tinchy. Now, Tinchy is another nation that I really that I was thinking about playing as, and I decided to go with man instead. But I like this nation too. So LA Tinchy is all about has a Mongolian theme to it, so it's really all about the cavalry. Now we still have all of the almost all of the same units and infantry that we had in MA Tinchy. We don't have the crossbows anymore, which is interesting for late age, but you still have composite bows. And this infantry is now, Tianchy's infantry is like the same in early age and middle age and late age. So it's amazing in early age. It's really good in middle age. And in late age, it's kind of just average, right? Now we've got, a 15 protection glaive is just it's good. It's not bad, but it's pretty average in late age, whereas it was pretty sweet in middle age. The special thing about Tinchy, well, first of all, let's look at their sacred. It is a sacred heavy cav. It has spirit sight, but its specialty is this howling bow, which is a bow that does fear on damage. And so that is pretty sweet. However, so this is really sweet and really powerful. It can really rout your armies, especially if they have low morale to begin with. But it's just a bow, and this is an effect on damage. So if you have very high protection, and it's a bow, so it's not armor piercing. So if you have good shields or high protection, or air access, so you can do arrow fend. You can negate this fairly effectively. Now, otherwise, it's still a quite respectable, heavy cavalry with high defense, decent protection. You've got your couple of attacks, and it's sacred, so, you can still make this work in a lot of ways. We'll have to see what the player brings to this game. We also have these barbarian horsemen and heavy cav. In particular, this one is pretty strong. It's very cheap for a quite decent heavy cav unit, but it is recruit anywhere. You can recruit this in any province, and so typically that's what happens with LA Tianchis. You're recruiting tons of cavalry in every province, and these guys have pillaging, and so a lot of raiding and pillaging going on. You can lead them with these khans, which are also recruit anywhere. That's the basic idea. In terms of mages, we have this water astral kind of mage that we've had for all the ages here, Master of the Way. We have the cap-only Celestial Master. This time his paths are diminished compared to the earlier ages, but still the same idea, sort of a bit of a rainbow mage here with some astral. Fortunately, we don't have the Geomancer to power communions anymore. And then we have these Ancestor Smiths, or 3 varieties. There's the Earth Death one, there's the Nature to Death one, and there's the Death to Air one. And they have some cross paths as well. These are pretty sweet. They're sacred. They're kind of expensive to recruit. You can recruit anywhere, but at 220, it does cost a lot to constantly spam them out. But they're sacred, so their upkeep cost isn't as severe. Old age is a bit of a pain, but these can be very solid mages. They give you access to really excellent spells. You can do all the buffing that you need. I've seen some kind of funky builds where people kind of thug these out and have a bless just for these guys with the Ancestor Sword, which does fear and whatever. Anyways, that's LA Tinchy. And finally, LA Ulm, which needs no introduction. This is one of the strongest nations in LA for a couple of reasons. So this nation can easily get into blood and vampires. They have their own vampires, and of course you could do the regular vampires too. Although typically you need to take those paths on your god. It's also an astral nation, because why not? You have some of this Earth Holy cross path, so you can still do your iron darts and iron blizzards, but because you don't have Earth 2, it's a little trickier to pull off. So that tends to not be as much of a strategy for this nation. But yes, a lot of astral blood, and we have a sacred heavy cav, which is a very heavy cav, 23 protection. Typically, but this is like ridiculously expensive, and typically this is not what people use when they go LA Ulm. Instead, people tend to rely on the Ranger, which is a incredibly cheap crossbowman. Very lightly protected, but only 12 gold 8 resources, 12 precision crossbows. Is a fantastic crossbow unit. So you have hordes of these behind some kind of chaff wall, which could be the free spawn wolves that you get from the wolf herd, or it could be any one of these high protection, melee units, including these Ghoul Guardians, which, although they are undead, they have this Black Halberd, which is good against Sacred. So you have a lot of the recurring themes from Ulm, but with a sort of undead vampire twist to them. A very powerful nation. Okay, so that's who we're playing against. Let's do a very brief overview of the nation we'll be playing as, which is LA Man. And so let's take a look at our units. We've got some light infantry here, which are completely forgettable, except that we start with some in our army, so we're kind of stuck with them. This in late age, this is a pretty bad unit. Length 4 spear, I guess, can repel a little bit, but there's just a bad unit. Then we have axemen, which are also pretty bad. I guess it's not that they're bad, it's just that we have better units. We have other better units. So, if you look at this unit, 15 protection, for 10, 19 with an axe. This is quite comparable to a lot of the other infantry that other nations are recruiting. So it's okay. It's just we can do much better. So we're not going to be recruiting these guys. Okay, we have archers. We have a light archer, which is like almost a throwback from early age. Just short bow with a dagger. Pretty useless. We're not going to be recruiting this guy. I'm going to skip ahead here to look at these two archers. These are much more interesting. So we have the longbowman, which is the same as the guy in MA. And the specialty of the longbowman is not only he has 12 precision, but he also has a longbow, which has a much longer range, 45 range. Now, in late age, things have heavy armor, so these are not as effective. But if you are fighting against somebody who is recruiting a lot of lightly armored crossbows, then you will win the archery duel if you have the same number of longbows, because they're going to shoot every turn instead of every 2 turns. And if they're if they are recruiting crossbows, like for example Ulm's Rangers or just indie crossbows that don't have a lot of protection, then they will get murderized by longbows. So this is a very effective counter to most people who are going to be massing crossbows, unless they're massing high protection crossbows, which usually you don't do because you want to have more bolts in the air. So there's definitely a place for these, depending what you're fighting against. Now here we have an interesting unit, the Forester. The Forester, 12 precision, but it's just a short bow. So again, this is sort of EA, early age reminiscent. Not high protection. However, he is a dual wielder. He's a great patroller, and he is stealthy. And he's very cheap. Now, this is actually a really good unit to get really high attack density if you were fighting like giants or some kind of super high defense, like maybe I almost want to say like this could be a solution to glamour troops, right? Or very high defense elves. Just because the attack density on these guys is pretty insane. And an axe, the daggers are a pretty bad weapon, but the axe is quite a decent weapon. So actually this could be part of your army against, if you had a nation that was all glamour, all glamour, then, the arrow fire can pop the glamour, and then once they're done shooting their pretty useless arrows, they go in and harass the enemy. They are also good for raiding because they're stealthy, and we do have stealthy commanders. So you can actually recruit a ton of these guys and go raid your enemy. You can kind of basically elf somebody as man. So they definitely have a use. Now, it depends who you're fighting, and against many of the nations in this game, these guys are not going to be in an actual fight. They're probably just going to end up being more of a liability in that they could rout. However, if we're getting a lot of buffs, if we're getting Wind Guide and Flaming Arrows, then that's just more arrows in the sky. That's always nice. And once these get in the late game, once you got all the buffs that give everything 20 protection and weapons of sharpness, then this is a lot of attack density. So this is actually quite this can actually be a very useful unit situationally. Okay, we also have a plain old Recruit Anywhere crossbow, which is quite nice. This one is 10 gold, 9 resources for 11 precision crossbow. If we compare this to the Ranger of Ulm, it's actually very similar. That one, Ulm, has 1 more precision, costs a bit more gold, a little fewer resources. So very similar. This is a great, cheap, mass recruitable crossbow if that's what you want to recruit. Importantly, it does have a hat. And finally, we get... Okay, well, So I'm dancing around the great units here, but let's save the best for last. We have a Tower Knight, which is your typical man heavy cavalry. Not as extreme as Ulm's heavy cav, but we're going to be taking scales, obviously, as man. And so you can actually pump these out in reasonable numbers, and they're... Depending on the indies you have, they can be good for expansion, for attack rear. Because we expect to have a lot of people massing crossbows, heavy cav is fantastic in attack rear or attack archers to destroy, to get in the back line and ruin a bunch of crossbowmen's days. So this is definitely something that we will see a use for. And you might think, yeah, but crossbows are really good against heavy cav and things like that. That's true. But as you'll see, all of man has these fantastic shields. We've got these kite shields, which give us... we've got kite shields, which are really good even against crossbows. So yes, they will get... it's not cost efficient. If somebody has a good chaff wall, if you're massing heavy cav, then it will get melted by the crossbows behind it. But if you are putting these in small groups on top and bottom and having them do attack rear, then they can be very, very effective. Okay, let's talk about the last 3 units here. The Tower Guard, the Defender, and the Warden. So the Tower Guard and the Defender are basically the same. The Defender is just a slightly better version. So this is a heavy infantry with a crossbow. This is what makes LA Man. So... the Tower Guard is only 12 gold and 23 resources. It has 13 protection, so I said heavy infantry. In late age, this is kind of medium-ish infantry. But it is basically a 11 precision crossbowman with 13 protection and a kite shield. So having the combination of crossbow plus kite shield is very powerful, especially if you have big crossbow duels or archery duels, because these guys are very well protected against opposing arrows coming in, and they can dish it out. If we look at the Defender, it is even better in that it is a bit more expensive, but you have 1 more precision, you have 3 more protection. And so in my opinion, this actually makes this a better unit. There's also, if we look at the melee stats on this one, this is strength 10, attack 11. The defense is mostly because of the shield parry here, so it's not a high defense unit. So, like I said, strength 10, attack 11, which means you have a 12 attack, 16 slashing damage broadsword. Whereas the Defender has strength 11, attack 12, giving us a 13 attack, 17 damage broadsword. And also in the morale, here it's 13, whereas here it's 12. So you're just getting an overall much better unit in the Defender. And if we look at the cost difference, it's 12 gold going up to 16 gold. So it's 30. It's like a third more expensive. And the resource cost isn't that much higher. It's only 4 additional resources. In my opinion, this is the superior unit because what's great about the Defender is, yes, it's a crossbow, but it's also going to fight as a heavy infantry. It's a crossbow that you put in the front of your army that will absorb all the chaff running into it. So we actually do want it to be a good fighting melee troop. if all you're looking for is to spam crossbow bolts or arrows, we actually have crossbowmen and longbowmen for that. So if your opponent is massing low protection crossbows, yes, have these on your front line, but then you're going to have longbowmen in your back line. You're not going to have all these guys in your back line. So this is a fantastic unit. It incidentally also has castle defense bonus of 2, and since we're recruiting plenty of these guys, it means it's a huge pain to siege down a man's units. Okay, and finally, but similarly, we have our Sacred, which is the Warden. This is a two-handed heavy infantry, so 18 protection, no shield, but 18 protection, which is quite nice, and a great sword, which is really our only very high damage attack for this nation. So if we were dealing with some kind of thug or some kind of very high prot that we needed to chew through, this is really our only recruitable way to do it. But it also has a crossbow. It is sacred, it has stealth and forced survival, and it is not ridiculously expensive. 26 gold is it's much higher than the infantry, but 31 resources, this is relatively affordable, especially on scales. 14 morale is fine. We're humans, 11 magic resistance, we'll deal with it, 13 hit points. This is not necessarily a unit that you would take a whole bless around because, what's nice about it is that you can put it in the same group as these defenders, right? Because they all have the same idea. They're crossbowmen, but they can fight well. So you can mix these guys in with your other units. There are a lot of interesting bless ideas that you can take to help fill in some of man's weaknesses. So they're quite useful. They're not going to be the centerpiece of your army, right? You're not mainly going to rely on these sacreds, but they should probably play an important role in filling the gaps and in addressing some of the things that we're missing in our lineup. Let's go through the mages quickly, the commanders quickly. So we've got a scout, except this is an expensive scout who can lead troops, and in particular he can lead 10 troops. He's stealthy and forced survival. This is almost begging to have squads of these guys leading foresters for raiding. Although typically I think I'm going to end up using the Lord Wardens for that, but we'll get to that in a minute. So an interesting idea for a scout. We've got a Castellan who has 80 leadership. Fine, but once again, I will be using the Lord Warden, which I'll get to in a moment, I promise. The Judge is an interesting unit. 70 gold, does not need a lab to be recruited, because technically he doesn't have any magic skills, but he gives you random fire and death, and that is our way to break into death, and one of our ways to break into fire. So typically you recruit just enough of these to get some fire and death, which you use for sight searching, and later you can use for forging. We have a Holy One priest, which has Inquisitor, useful for getting rid of enemy dominion, and we actually have a Holy 2, which is quite nice. So yay us. We have a Magister, which is an interesting unit. It is a Mason who can upgrade our forts to a super, super high level. Already we can get to Citadels, but we can go one beyond Citadel with this. He is stealthy and has a siege bonus, so he can also be used to help crack extra nasty forts. And he'll come with not completely useless magic paths. Okay, Earth 1 is pretty useless, but if you get a random combination of any astral and air, then they can be mildly useful in, as part of your army, doing random support magic or communion stuff. So can definitely be useful to recruit a bunch of these before you go siege someone else's cap, for example. Next, we have the Magister Arcane. This is a really, really cool unit. This is our cap mage, except it's not cap only. You can recruit this anywhere, and it's only 2 recruitment points. So we're going to be spamming these guys out in every fort. They have 4 paths plus a random 4.5 paths. Air 2, Earth, Astral. So these are amazing paths. You guys know I love my Earth Astral mages. So communions. Now, they're not like super cheap, so you can't spam these out as communion slaves. And the spells that they tend to cast, like Gifts from Heaven, Thunderstrike, whatever, tend to be expensive. So you have to have a pretty balanced communion to use these effectively, but because you're recruiting them everywhere, you're going to have a ton of these guys. Really a fantastic mage. Just there's a lot of great stuff that we're going to be able to pull off with these guys. But I'm going to talk a bit more about that in another video because this one's running long. I just wanted to give you an introduction to all of our units. This also can get us fire access, and we can boost that in our communions, which is important. Really, the only downside here is that he's an old age fellow, and so every winter you tend to lose a few of them to diseases and such. As you might have noticed, all of our mages are mundane researchers, which means we can take full drain scales, get those points for free, and it doesn't affect our research ability. Finally, we have the Lord Warden, and in most nations, the Sacred Commander is kind of a forgettable thing that you don't really recruit unless it's like a giant and you were taking some kind of Thug Bless. I actually think this unit is quite valuable. First of all, it's a good commander with 80 leadership, and it happens to be a priest, not just sacred, and it has combat caster. So for one thing, if you have a bunch of these leading your troops, it is easy, it gives you great extra firepower against undead because they could just banish. That's one thing. The other thing is, because these are recruit anywhere mages, we don't need our cap recruit turns to be recruiting our cap only mages. In fact, this is our only cap only commander. So we can spam these guys out if, should we choose to. And they're basically buffed versions of these wardens. So they've got a crossbow, they've got a greatsword, they've got high protection. So there are a lot of interesting builds that you can do with these guys, especially with construction and bows and special kinds of blesses. And we're going to kind of go for some kind of strategy like that. So I'm going to talk about this, my intended strategy. In the next video, we'll break down my pretender design, and we'll talk about how we're going to deal with all the other nations and all the strategic and tactical choices. I'll see you guys then. Take care.